Good evening and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Friday the 20th of August and this is Scotland at 7. I'm Andrew Wilson and this evening I'm hosting the programme from our studios in Cowcaddens. Firstly, we will look at today's coronavirus update, and then I will read some of today's news headlines, and then I will introduce a discussion that we were able to pre-record earlier today. Firstly, here's the coronavirus update. As of 2 p.m. today, a total of 2,614,013 people in Scotland have tested through the NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 2,237,260 have been confirmed negative and 376,753 have tested positive. There are 3,613 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. I'm afraid to say that there have been 9 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 8,067. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 312 were in hospital last night, 34 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 4,071,537 people had received their first dose of the COVID vaccination, and 3,526,754 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures were not available at the time we came on air this evening. And now for today's news headlines. The Scottish Government and the Scottish Greens have negotiated a groundbreaking deal to form a new power-sharing partnership at Holyrood, based on a model already in use in New Zealand. The draft of the Bute House Agreement was published earlier today. The deal commits the parties to work together to provide effective and responsible leadership for Scotland during this session of the Scottish Parliament, in the interests of Scotland, of the people who live in Scotland, and of future generations. The agreement states that each party will maintain its own principles and distinctive voice while working together in Scotland's interests, yet differ on certain matters constructively and respectfully. The First Minister said that cooperation and collaboration in place of acrimony is what people want to see and which is essential. Speaking at Bute House in Edinburgh earlier today, the First Minister said that poverty, inequality, moving to net zero, recovering from COVID and achieving independence through a referendum were both parties' priorities. The SNP's National Executive Committee is due to meet tomorrow, and the Greens have scheduled a meeting of their membership for Saturday 28th August to approve the agreement, which will take effect before Holyrood resumes sitting on Tuesday the 31st of August. If the deal is approved, it will be the first time a Green Party has been in government in the UK, and it will see 2 Green MSPs given junior minister roles. A shared draft policy programme, the Bute House Agreement, has been agreed. It focuses on areas of mutual interest to improve the way Scotland is governed and create a stable platform to meet the challenges which Scotland faces. It details collaboration on the climate emergency, economic recovery, child poverty, the natural environment, energy and the Constitution. It includes commitments to hold a referendum on Scottish independence after the COVID pandemic has passed within the current parliamentary session, to increase investment in active travel and public transport, including a fair fares review to provide a realistic and affordable alternative to car use, to a strengthened framework of support for marine renewables and offshore wind sectors, to take forward a 10-year £500 million Just Transition Fund for the North East and Moray, to significantly increase the level of the Scottish Child Payment in order to maximise the impact on child poverty, with the full £20 payment being achieved within the lifetime of the Parliament, to designate at least one new national park by the end of this parliamentary session, to enhance marine environmental protection, to implement an effective national system of rent controls, enhance tenants' rights, and deliver 110,000 affordable homes by 2032, to invest at least £1.8 billion over this parliamentary session in energy efficiency and renewable heating, to establish 2 new Scottish Government overseas offices in Warsaw and Copenhagen to promote Scotland's interests in Central Europe and the Nordic countries. More than 18,000 people have been flown out of Kabul since the Taliban took over Afghanistan's capital, a NATO official said today, pledging to redouble evacuation efforts as the criticism of the West's handling of the crisis has intensified. Thousands of people, desperate to flee the country, were still thronging the airport, the official, who declined to be identified, told Reuters, even though the Taliban have urged people without legal travel documents to return home. The speed with which the Islamist militant Taliban conquered Afghanistan as US and other foreign troops were completing their withdrawal surprised even their own leaders and has left power vacuums in many places. The Taliban called for unity ahead of Friday prayers, the first since they seized power, calling on imams to persuade people not to leave Afghanistan amid the chaos at the airports, protests and reports of violence. Residents in Kabul and 4 other major cities said prayers appeared to have passed off without incident, though attendance was low. Also in Afghanistan, Taliban fighters hunting a journalist from Deutsche Welle have shot dead 1 member of his family and severely injured another, the German broadcaster said, adding that 3 more of its journalists had had their homes raided. Some Afghan journalists have also reported having been beaten and their homes raided since the Taliban seized the capital, Kabul, on Sunday. A Deutsche Welle statement said that the Taliban had been doing a house-to-house search to find an unnamed journalist who it said was now working in Germany. Other relatives were able to flee and are on the run now, according to the statement. Journalists are targeted around the world, especially in times of upheaval, but the issue is particularly sensitive in Afghanistan, where the Taliban maintained tight control when it was last in power. The SNP has said that Dominic Raab will cause long-term damage to his position and the credibility and authority of the Tory government unless he resigns or is sacked by the Prime Minister. It comes after the Foreign Office was forced to admit that the urgent phone call requested by officials to help interpreters flee Afghanistan was never made, after the Foreign Secretary said he was unavailable during his holiday at a 5-star hotel in Crete. Commenting, the SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford MP said, "It is utterly unforgivable that when Afghanistan was falling, Dominic Raab was too busy relaxing on a sun lounger in a 5-star luxury holiday resort to fulfil his basic duties of his job. The Foreign Secretary has put people's lives at risk, and he must go, or he will do long-term damage to his role and the credibility and authority of the Tory government." Elsewhere, 37 migrants are feared dead after a dinghy carrying dozens of people capsized off the coast of the Canary Islands. The sole survivor to have been found so far has told Spain's Maritime Rescue Services on Thursday. A rescue helicopter carrying the survivor, a 30-year-old woman who appeared exhausted and shaken, and 2 corpses, landed at Las Palmas de Gran Canaria airport after a cargo ship found them 135 miles away from the coast. The woman told rescue workers that 40 migrants were aboard the dinghy, but Maritime Rescue Services said there were no signs of anybody else near where the vessel capsized. The woman has been hospitalised with severe dehydration. Back in Scotland, bold plans to improve health and reduce inequalities for women in Scotland have been published today by the Scottish Government. Scotland is the first country in the UK to have a women's health plan, which outlines ambitious improvement and change in areas including menopause, heart health, menstrual health including endometriosis, and sexual health. The Women's Health Plan sets out 66 actions to ensure all women enjoy the best possible health care throughout their lives. It takes on board the real-life experiences of women who have given their feedback on what is important to them. Key actions include appointing a national women's health champion and a women's health lead in every SNHS board, establishing a women's health research fund to close gaps in scientific and medical knowledge, providing a central platform for women's health information on NHS Inform, setting up a women's health community pharmacy service, commissioning endometriosis research to better develop treatment and management, and a cure, developing a menopause and menstrual health workplace policy and promoting it across the public, private and third sectors, improving information and public awareness of heart disease symptoms and the risks for women. In Glasgow, a walk-through testing site at Glasgow Caledonian University has been launched to provide testing for people with COVID symptoms and rapid lateral flow home testing kits for people without symptoms to use at home. Minister for Public Health Marie Todd said, "This walk-through testing centre at the Centre of Executive Education Building Centre within Glasgow Caledonian University at Cowcaddens is the 54th site across Scotland providing testing options for people with and without coronavirus symptoms. As restrictions ease, testing is more important than ever to help protect people around you, and the progress we've made so far. Rapid lateral flow testing is already helping us to find cases that might otherwise have been missed, as around 1 in 3 people with COVID-19 do not display any symptoms. You should still get tested even if you have been double vaccinated. While the latest evidence suggests vaccines provide a high level of protection against the effects of COVID-19, they do not yet provide a guarantee that you can still get the virus or pass it on to others." The public are being urged to help shape the first ever local food strategy produced by the Scottish Government. Rural Affairs Secretary Marie Gudgeon has urged everyone, from private individuals to businesses and organisations, to take part in a consultation, the first stage in a strategy to make high-quality food accessible to all and to promote the benefits of locally produced food and drink. One of the Scottish Government's 100 Days commitments, the consultation covers a range of issues, including promoting local produce, encouraging people to grow their own food, and making quality local food and drink available to all. It seeks views on the 3 pillars of the strategy, namely connecting people with food, connecting producers with buyers, and harnessing the buying power of public sector procurement. Vertical farming, a new agricultural technology that could help support local food production, is also included in the consultation. The food and drink sector in Scotland is made up of more than 17,000 businesses which employ around 122,000 people, many in remote and economically fragile rural and island communities. Now, earlier today we were lucky enough to be joined by 2 fantastic guests who were able to join us in a discussion of the events that are unfolding in Afghanistan and the more wider issues that arise in respect of people who are seeking asylum and refuge around the world. We were joined by Roza Salih, who is a human rights activist based in Glasgow. Roza co-founded the Glasgow Girls with fellow pupils from Drumchapel High School. The Glasgow Girls campaigned to stop the UK Border Agency carrying out dawn raids and detaining and then deporting children. And we were also lucky enough to be joined by Ika Ferrer-Gotić. Ika is a Bosnian media personality, presenter and producer, currently employed by the regional television N1, which operates within the global network of CNN. Ika was born in Travnik, but she grew up in the Netherlands, and she has also lived in Austria, Croatia, Cuba and Spain. Here's the discussion that we pre-recorded earlier today. Hello Ika, and hello Roza. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure to have you both on the programme this evening. On a Friday on Broadcasting Scotland, we have taken the opportunity to discuss the leading topics of the week, perhaps in more depth and with a little more reflection than the news programmes that we make during the rest of the week. And so it's fantastic that we have Ika and Roza here with us this evening. We're going to reflect on the events that are unfolding in Afghanistan this week, and also to reflect on the broader issues relating to those who seek refuge and asylum in countries as a result of war or famine or the other reasons that force families to flee and to travel around the world and build new lives. And I know that both Ika and Roza will be able to help us discuss those topics and to reflect on their own experiences as well this evening. And as I say, I'm very grateful to them both for joining us. What I'd like to do first is to talk a little bit about the unfolding events in Afghanistan. We have been watching the reports from Kabul in particular over the last few days, and are reflecting on the efforts of Afghans who wish to leave, and on the efforts of some Western governments to provide assistance to those who have previously assisted those Western governments in their operations in Afghanistan, and who now feel that they are at risk with the passing of control in Afghanistan to the Taliban, and so these people wish to leave. And so, firstly, Ika, if I can turn to you first of all this evening, what's your reflection on the news and events that we're hearing and seeing reported from Kabul over the last few days?
Well, before we start reflecting on how I saw what's going on in Afghanistan and how I experience their experience at the moment, we have to take some facts into consideration. So, United States government has decided, with Biden in charge, to withdraw all the troops from Afghanistan after 20 years of being there, trying to support and build a sort of democracy, build sort of modern society in Afghanistan. And Afghanistan was that. They managed to have more or less a modern society, and that is all going to perish now. That is all going to waste now. Everything they have built over 20 years, it's going to waste. And taken in consideration, but we have to understand that the Afghan government was also corrupt. The President Ghani, he didn't want to resign, even though there were billions of dollars vanishing into thin air, and people wanted him to resign. He didn't want to do that. And then American government saw that Afghanistan government didn't really want to work hard with the Americans, so they can make sure and secure a safe haven, let's say, for the Afghan people to stay there and to live there and to have their lives and to work. So what they decided is to just move the troops away from Afghanistan and see what happens. Now, the problem here is that there wasn't a clear strategy, as in how they wanted to do that. They didn't want to do that partially, slowly, and to stay there for a couple more years and take couple of thousands of troops away and then just do it slowly. They didn't do that. So what they did, they just got up and they left. So it left a lot of space for the Taliban forces to get into the country and to take over cities. So Afghanistan fell in Kabul when they took over the presidency. The President Ghani, he fled the country with billions of dollars. And now there's a question: where did he get all that money that actually belonged to the Afghan people? Now, we understand that the government was corrupt, but this is not the way for a transitional government, which is Taliban. We always have to remember who Taliban is and who they were in the past. And when you're listening to the media, when you listen what they say, it's always the talk about smooth transition of power. Now, the question that I ask my guests on the show is, what smooth transition of power? Uh, we always have the strategy that we don't negotiate with terrorists, and this is what Taliban are. They are terrorists. They are financed by drug dealing and kidnapping. So this is the very definition of what terrorists are. If you terrorize people, you're a terrorist. So my question was always to my guest, what smooth transition of power? They came in, they took what they wanted to take, they met with no resistance or very little resistance. They took the presidency, and this is how it's going to be. And the Afghan people are in panic. The airport is in chaos. They cannot leave the country. Women and children, young girls, will be targeted first. There is a huge humanitarian catastrophe, humanitarian crisis ongoing right now. Now, the American government has promised $500 million in resettlement of Afghan refugees. Do we really want that? Do we really want the people leave their country and live somewhere else as refugees? Is this really the outcome that we want to finance? When I say we, I mean the West. Now, we have to think about what's the best for the people. And obviously, we have failed the Afghan people in their country because we have not supported them. NATO left Afghanistan, European Union left Afghanistan, British troops left Afghanistan. And now we just have to sit and wait and see what's going on. And obviously, there is going to be some breach of international human laws, such as taking away education to girls, taking away right to work for women, their voice. So we have to sit here and really think what we've really done in this country that had a chance to be a modern society.
Thank you, Ika. That's a great opening point, and the facts and the points that you make are absolutely correct and are important to us as a background for our conversation this evening. Roza, turning to you, the perspective from the UK having been combatants for 20 years in Afghanistan as part of the US-led coalition forces, and I suppose reflecting on the UK's military activities in Afghanistan going back probably 200 years. What's your perspective on the events that we've seen unfolding over the last few days in Afghanistan?
First of all, it's really heartbreaking to see what's happening in Afghanistan and the people that civilians are suffering. Of course, Ika touched on a lot of a political background, and I think that's very important for the public to know. In relation to US military and of course UK and as an ally supporting kind of locally employing people, as far as I'm aware, they employed over 7,000 people, civilians over there, trying to kind of get into the community. I don't know what their mindset was, but now they've started this kind of progress, like for negotiation and kind of decreasing violence. But then all of a sudden they have basically decided that they will be leaving. And I think that is the biggest issue here, and I think Ika touched on it. But for the UK, I would say that, as we have supported what happened in Syria, we introduced, or we committed to a resettlement scheme for the Syrian people. And I think it's important that from the UK perspective that we do not criminalize refugee people coming over here. As we already know what's happened in Afghanistan, you cannot criminalize genuine refugees. And I think it's important to touch on what's happening politically in the UK government, in UK Parliament, that there's an immigration bill that is going through Parliament that is restricting basic rights for refugees. And I think this is very problematic, and the UK government or the Home Office have already stopped many of the visas for settling. They stopped the student visas, and they have. I think there's a limit of people for the relocation of settlement in the UK. So there's really problematic that the way they are approaching this humanitarian crisis. And we really need to step up our game and try to help Afghan civilians. We're not talking about politicians or military, we're talking about civilian people.
Thank you, Roza. That's a good point, and it's what I'd like to touch on next with you. To expand upon that point. We know, or it could be said that this most recent military adventure in Afghanistan by Western nations was, in a sense, an experiment in nation building. I know that the invasion was precipitated by a wish to deal with terrorists who were who had found shelter in the then Taliban-run Afghanistan. But thinking more broadly, if we regard the military, the invasion and the attempt to run Afghanistan for 20 years as an experiment with people's lives and an experiment in nation building or nation creation. And now we see the sudden precipitate withdrawal of military forces and the departure of or the withdrawal of support in many ways from the Afghan government and from the current state of Afghanistan. Why do you think it is that Western governments in particular wish to experiment firstly wish to experiment and fail in creating nations, and then wish to experiment again with people's lives when they abandon the previous experiment, which has failed?
It's very simple, to be honest, to answer your question. The I think this is my view, and I think, how did the Taliban get so many arms? And I think this comes down to private companies from America and in the world who are benefiting from the situation. And I don't know this politically. There is something is going on. How did the Taliban get hold of so many arms to take control of a country? Yes, of course, they were in government in 1996 to 2021, but they went to the mountains, and they how did they recruit it, and how did they get these arms, and then they come back to the city within days. They have control of the country. So there is some, like, you everybody would ask questions. How did that happen? How did that so quickly happen? And private companies have sold many arms, and they profited from selling these arms, and that's a fact, and you cannot deny it. But coming back to the withdrawal, I think this is the same things happened to the Iraq situation, that US troops going in and then withdrawing without any solution, or making sure the country actually becomes more democratized, and good people, actually the public takes over, and they trust on people who are only interested in money. And and you saw what happened with the Islamic State, which came from Iraq to Syria, and the civil war created in Syria. So the same thing is happening in Afghanistan, is the replication of the same strategy which they have created. And I think that the superpowers are, in my view, that they are in war with each other, and they're trying to control the strategic areas in the region. Of course, there comes profits for like oil and selling arms, which they also make money from.
Thank you, Rosa. Those are very, very good points. Ika, following on from that, last time you and I spoke, we did touch a little bit on the aspect of in seeking to understand events such as these. We touched a little bit on the point of following the money. And that's the point that Rosa's making here. I think if we talk about the connection between power and money, and as Rosa rightly said, she reflected on the circumstances that happened in Syria and in Iraq and potentially in Libya as well, where we see global powers flexing their muscles and exercising decision making in one way or another. Ika, do you think, and reflecting in particular from your own experience in Bosnia, do you think that is it a question here of a connection between people who wish to seize power and people who wish to make money? Is it that unholy mixture that is leading to so much pain and suffering for people?
As we can see, history repeats itself all the time. And after Holocaust, we said never again, right? And then Rwanda happened. And then Srebrenica happened. And then 3 year siege of Sarajevo happened. And now it's happening all over the world. We see Rohingya. It's happening over there. Now we see Afghanistan. It's happening again. So that never again that the international community keeps promising is not a promise that we can actually hold on to, unfortunately. And going from my own experience, but I would like to first reflect on something that Roza just said, that you just said. When it comes to United States being in Afghanistan, it's more of institution building rather than nation building, because that nation has been there for centuries, even way before then American culture was developed. When I say American, I mean European culture in America. So that institution building that United States tried to do in Afghanistan has failed drastically, dramatically, more than in any other country in the world, because Afghanistan war is the longest American war in history. So Americans did go back, and when you look from their perspective, it is understandable. When we hear Joe Biden, the president of the United States, when he says how many more children, American children, boys and girls, women and men, have to die for something that is obviously not working. We are not going to do this anymore, and I understand that. But then why go in if you don't have a plan? Before going into any war, you should have a plan, and it should not involve civilians. It did involve civilians, and that's the bad thing about it. And when I reflect from the war in Afghanistan, when I reflect on my own experiences, I can already see what is going to happen. I've spoken to Fatima Husseini. She's a young journalist and young artist from Kabul. And the last thing that she told me is, I need to get away now. I need to get out of this country now. They closed the airport, the borders are closed, and the journalists and the women that had a voice are targeted, which means I'm targeted myself. I'm a person of interest. So she needs to leave the country, and we have been working together with some organizations in Bosnia and around the world trying to get her out. Now, the question is, how will she go out? My own experience back in the 90s, she reminds me of my mom with three young girls, underage girls that had to flee the war because at that time, Croatian army got into Bosnia as well, next to the Serbian army. So we were targeted. We were in war for a couple of months, going through the shelling and through snipers and trying to stay alive. And I remember that path of leaving Bosnia and going to another country and not even knowing where. The goal was just to leave. And I told Linda that I have never told this story about me, how we had to leave the country. So I remember I was 7 or 8, and my eldest sister, she's 5 years older than me, and I had a younger sister too. She's 2 years younger than me. And I remember my mother, she was alone trying to cross the border to Croatia and just try to escape all the horrors that were brought with itself in Bosnia. I remember the fear. I remember being hungry, being thirsty, not having a place to sleep. I remember their uncertainty. And as a child, at that time, you grow up very fast. So you are not anymore a 7 or 8 year old. You are a grown up person that is looking for ways to survive with your mother, and feeling so bad to see your sisters going through the same thing as well. Eventually, we ended up in Croatia, which was also a very bad experience because Croatia and Bosnia were at war at that time. And then we ended up eventually in the Netherlands, and we grew up there and had our education there, and I had my children there. And 10 years ago, I decided to come back to Bosnia because there were so many stories that were untold, even mine, that I really needed to tell. I don't have anybody here. My mother and my sisters are not here. We lost basically all of our family. But I'm sticking here. I'm going to stay here until I find every story that has been untold to tell. Because there are a lot of those stories. Trust me, I'm probably gonna stay here for another 20 years. So that's going to be the case. And if I reflect my experiences, and I see the Afghan people, going through the same uncertainty where they're going to end up. And I know, talking to Fatima every day when I can get her on the phone, where she says, I just need to get out of the country, doesn't matter where. And this is the goal, just get out of the country, doesn't matter where, we'll come and we'll pick you up. And we already have settled everything here in Bosnia, Croatia, or Serbia, wherever she wants to have a place to live, to continue her career, to continue telling her story, and basically, and most importantly, to be safe and not to be targeted by the Taliban, because she's a woman that has a voice, that has something to say, that was very open about what is going on, and that stands for women's rights, and that stands for international human rights. You cannot do that in Afghanistan anymore. And I think when people look at Afghanistan and says, oh, that's something that's happening way far away, we don't care, that's over there in the Middle East. If this happens in 21st century in any country in the world, then nobody's safe. Nobody's safe. It can happen to us again. It happened here in Europe. It can happen to anybody. So this is when we say we have to protect international human law and human rights, it means we have to protect them for all of us. If we fail in Afghanistan or in Syria or in Bosnia, then nobody is safe. You're not safe. I'm not safe. People in America are not safe. So this is what people usually don't understand, that it's 21st century and we all have to stand up for human rights. And this is what I'm trying to do through my work.
Thank you, Mika. Your efforts to provide for and to protect Fatima are a timely reminder to us all of our obligations as individuals, let alone as nations, but as individuals, to do what we can for anyone who's seeking refuge or asylum, because, as you say, it could so easily happen to any of us. I was reflecting for a moment there. You were talking about your own experience as a young woman fleeing and seeking refuge. And I was also reflecting on the point that was made before, which was that it appears that Western nations suffer from some sort of amnesia or memory loss. We do not remember, we do not seem to be able to learn lessons from previous military adventures in order to prevent the inevitable disasters that follow those military adventures, in order to prevent them from happening again. And I was wondering, do you think that in part, for those who have sought refuge and those who are seeking to build new lives, one of the ways potentially of dealing with the trauma and the experience is perhaps to wish to put those experiences and those traumas into a box and to put them to one side and to try and move on and in a sense forget them, always reflecting on one's life having been changed by them. But do you think part of the process, part of the reason that we seem to be unable to learn lessons and to prevent these events happening again is in part is that also in a way a part of the human nature of trying to move on from traumatic events by not revisiting them?
And that is exactly what is going on. That is exactly what happens every time there is a traumatic event. And doesn't have to be on a large scale, like leaving the country and being a refugee and leaving a country that is at war and being uncertain about whether you're going to be alive or not tomorrow. It can go from very simple things like a fight in the family, or a fight at work, or a traumatic event somewhere in your own city where you are very safe. We tend to box it and to leave it so we can survive. It is a human nature to push things down so you can move on. I have done that. I can only talk about my own experiences. I'm not a psychologist, but I can tell you what I have experienced. I have boxed everything that I have been through, and even forgotten about certain things that were really big and really had a huge impact on my life. I boxed them and I left them aside, but then it caught up with me. It did catch up with me. And as that has happened, I had to come back to Bosnia. I had to realize, I had to find out where I came from. I had to find out what really happened to me. And in that process, I have learned that more traumatic events have happened to me that I actually even thought I've forgotten about completely. And that is a process. It took me 10 years to find out, okay, this is what we've been through. And I sort of connected the dots in the end. And when I finally managed to do that, I became a very good journalist. I actually could really understand what people are going through and sympathize with them, but also stay impartial in my work, because I have already worked out my own things, my own trauma, my own experiences from the past, and that is very important. This is why you have soldiers that come back from war who seem to be okay for a couple of years, but then the population that goes through most suicide actually are soldiers from the war that came and never got through their trauma. And this is the problem. So I believe that Fatima, so she's a protagonist in my story now. And I think that she is going to go through these things for many, many years until she's ready to really work them out. Because I know she's traumatized through our messages, through our conversations, through our phone calls, even through our interview. You can see that she's a good person, but she's going through a lot. And recognizing that, only thing you can do is actually have empathy for the person. And, you know, sitting there in my studio, which is completely cooled down and it's beautiful and it's nice, my colleagues are around me, and looking at her where she kept losing power and connection because bombing were going on, and I completely felt powerless and useless. But then in my ear, my colleague told me, but you're telling her story and this is what you're doing, don't feel like that. Because I teared up a little bit, of course. I'm sitting there and I'm sitting in this luxury, and she doesn't know if she's going to live for the next hour. And Linda also told me the only thing that you can do is to have empathy and to tell their stories the way it is. And this is what I'm trying to do, and hopefully I'll be able to do more for her, and hopefully for more people, because Bosnia and Herzegovina is a country that is on the migrant route from Middle East. I covered migrant crisis in Bosnia as well, and this is closer to Bihać, so it's northwest of Bosnia. What I've seen during my stay with the refugees, thousands and thousands of young boys and men that fled the country and ended up in Bosnia because they couldn't go through Croatia breaching the international humanitarian law, not letting refugees to pass, was a catastrophe on its own. Unfortunately, this is what we're going to see from Afghanistan as well, and we are ready for it, and we are going to do the best we can to accommodate the refugees that are coming to Bosnia, because Bosnia had their refugees too, including me. And this is something that we don't forget from the past. We don't forget the countries that took us in. We don't forget all our youth that left, even came back, and some of them never came back. And we somehow feel like we have to do better. We have to do better. We have to be more humane. We have to be more empathetic. We have to have sympathy for them, and we have to make sure that we have institutions that are strong enough to accommodate them and to help them move on to the next stage, whatever that stage is, as long as they are safe and they have all their needs met right here in Bosnia.
Thank you, Vika. That's fantastic. Now, Roza, turning to you now, I think you were perhaps 11 or 12 when, as a young woman, you sought refuge from Iraq, from Kurdistan. And so thinking a moment about your own reflections on that experience, and as Ika was saying, the experiences of fear, of growing up very fast, and then of having to of handling that trauma, and either continuing to tell the stories or boxing the stories away in order to attempt to move on. What's your own reflection?
Yeah, I think it was wonderful how Ika actually, told her story. And, I think most refugees are going through hunger when they are traveling. As a child is much, much harder because you see your mother is suffering, you see your sister. And I think that is the experience we've gone through to seek safety and forced to leave our home, really. And my experience as I was 11 years old, traveling from the border of Iraq to Turkey, and I was a child, of course. I didn't know much about like where we are traveling to, but we are crossing the water, and it's heavy river, and we are going on like donkeys, and that experience is just like, I'm like, why we're leaving our home? Like, you ask these questions to your parents, and your parents is like, it's not safe. And we were when I saw what's happened in Afghanistan, where people are running to the plane, that happened to our country, that people suffered so much. And yeah, we came to, we went through boats. I think we took all the transport that you can think of, really, that to come to a safe country. So as a child, leaving your home country, it's very, very hard. And every day I help people, I understand how hard it is to leave your home country. You can't speak the language, the culture is different. Everything is impacted on your life. But the experience that back home, where your family have been murdered and killed, and that experience will forever stay with you. My grandfather and my 3 uncles were murdered by the Saddam Hussein regime. So you ask this question, why were they killed? Just asking for freedom, for democracy. And I think it's very, very hard when you think of the people, the loved ones that you've lost, and to just come to a country that you feel safe and have basic human rights. And I think Ika touched upon that. We sometimes we keep it in a box, that our trauma or experience that are really sad. We just like want to forget about what we've gone through and just create a normal life. But sometimes you have to like reflect on the people that you've lost and what you've gone through, the experience that you've gone through, what's happened to your country, and why we've come to become a refugee in a democratic country.
Now, thank you, Rosa. Ika was talking a little of the empathy that she feels, and clearly the empathy that she feels for her colleague and friend Fatima, who's still in Kabul at the moment. I think it's fair to say that you must have felt a degree of empathy when you were at school, and for your friend your friend Agnisa, who was a refugee from Kosovo. And so I think the empathy element is important and is strong. Thinking about the circumstances that we see now unfolding, do you think that we are both in terms of the increased need to provide support to refugees, and also the hostile environment that's being displayed towards asylum seekers, refugees, Europeans, all manner of things in the growth of right-wing politics in the UK, for example. Do you think now is the time for more empathy? Do you think now is a time for the Glasgow girls to reform, if you will, and to start to work once more?
Yes, I think the Glasgow girls have always been around. We've been campaigning and changing people's lives. The hostile environment that you know, and many the public know in the UK, is that it's been created by a right-wing party, and is trying to really give a bad image of refugees. And now they're trying to illegalize. This is a problem. I have been campaigning since I was 15 years old, and sometime since very young age campaigning and trying to improve the current system, I ask myself these questions because I'm now in my 30s. I'm older than I used to be. I'm like, why do we have to make the system better? Why do we have to fight for it all the time? Why can't we have a government that respects these basic rights, which is enshrined or written in the UN Convention of Human Rights, and now we're still like struggling for basic rights in this country that we are living in. We are asking for rights for education, we're asking for a standard of living, we're asking for the right to work. These are the things that we're still like, we come to a safe country, but many people still struggle. Of course, I have my status, which I waited for over 8 years and it was not given to me easily. But many people are still suffering because they don't have these basic rights.
Oh,
And
sorry, go on, Rosa.
sorry, I think there was a corruption there. So yeah, and I think, of course, like as Glasgow girls, we will be doing as much as we can. We with different other organizations and groups that we are trying to mobilize politicians, councillors, MSPs to really stand strongly and oppose these strict changes on the immigration bill. Um, and we hope that other groups and other people, not everybody is Glasgow girls in Scotland. I always say to people, you are a Glasgow girl if you're speaking about rights and human rights. Ika is a Glasgow girl because she's doing great work now. She's trying to get Fatima over from Kabul and trying to save her from what's going on, and many people who have been killed in Afghanistan. So, that's a humanitarian. So whoever is acting on humanitarian basis and sympathetic to someone's life, really, life is precious and these people want a normal life, which is not being given to them, and they've not been fortunate to have that.
Thank you, Rosa. Now, Ika, what Rosa is talking about is the UK, the Westminster government, is seeking to bring forward what they call their nationality and borders bill. And I think it's widely accepted that that bill will criminalise those who are seeking asylum by non-government approved routes. It represents the UK government stepping away from its history of accepting refugees and supporting those who wish to seek asylum. It's regarded that, for example, that this nationality and borders bill would have made the kinder transport unlawful or illegal if we were seeking to establish it under the regime that this bill will introduce. And this, of course, also represents a stepping away from the UK's obligations under the 1951 refugee treaty and also the obligations under the UN conventions. So, Ika, thinking in particular from the perspective of your experience of populist politicians seeking power and then seeking to direct their antipathy towards others who are of a different religion or race or population or who are othered by other means. What's your reflection, Ika, on the news that the UK government apparently wish to go down that route?
Well, I don't want to use the word racist, but taking in consideration that UN Convention of Refugees and Geneva Convention of War also says that every person seeking asylum in a different country, doesn't matter, regardless of their religion, color of skin, their background, have the right to the asylum. So this is the case even in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Nobody can take away that from you because this is international humanitarian law. And this is actually news for me that UK is choosing to go 180 when it comes to international humanitarian law. That's the breach of the UN Convention when it comes to refugees. You have to, it does not matter. This actually reminds me a little bit of Trump politics when he first came to power 4.5 years ago, and when we started building the wall, and when he said, don't come here because you will not be let in and you need the permission. That's not what asylum is about. These are people that actually are running away from certain death, and you have to accept them and make sure that that they are provided with everything that they need. And this is what UN Convention says. Anything that is brought that does not reflect on the UN Convention is the breach of international humanitarian law. Now, if UK is doing that, the country that actually has been in Afghanistan, and the ambassador that stayed there the last and stuck there with people, I don't know what is going on. I know for sure that the countries in my region will not do such thing. And unfortunately, if United Kingdom is seeking to um, uh, impose that law, I'm not sure whether it's already imposed or it's already in act, but it's definitely breach of international humanitarian law. And I just would like to reflect on something that Roza said as well. I just want to condemn her for her bravery to speak and things that she's been through, and seeing her successful today and seeing her so intelligent and smart and full of life and talking about her experience. I think that's really bravery. And I think that I'm really happy to see you so successful, Rosa. And you brought tears to my eyes when you told me how you had to escape your country. And fortunately, you had a path and you had a way and you have settled somewhere, you and your family. And this is why it's important, because if we can learn on Rosa's experiences to see how people really can thrive through their new lives. This is why the UN Convention and this is why international humanitarian law has to stay intact. It has to be as it is. Anything else, I'm not going to call it racism, but I will call it the breach of human rights before everything.
Thank you, Ika. And Rosa, the points that Ika's making there, to bring it back to the UK for a moment, why do you think it is that the Westminster government is apparently so determined to introduce such callous and cruel legislation? Why do they wish to magnify the misery that refugees and asylum seekers are experiencing in the short term? What do you think is at the root of it?
I think the root of it is that they criminalizing refugees, and they don't want to help refugees really. And Priti Patel, which is very hypocritical, she's coming from a second generation of a refugee, is actually trying to implement this change into the law of the UK, and through the UK government, is just really surprising, to many people. And that's why I'll tell many people that she does not speak for genuine refugees, and she is trying to create this hostile environment that refugees are not welcome here, so people do not seek safety in the UK. And I think that's what she's trying to do. She's trying to make it as that the UK are against refugees, through this bill, and making this, saying that, we are having refugee camps in these countries where they can apply through administration of many paperwork, and then they can come over here if we make the decision, if it's a positive decision. So making it very complex and making it really not realistic or practical in reality. This cannot be implemented. So people who are forced to leave their homes would not be filling in paperwork. they would be coming to seek safety. That is from my experience, and I'm sure Ika will agree with me, you are just trying to flee that country, and you're seeking safety at whatever country it is that you're trying to reach.
Thank you, Roza. I'd like to say thank you both to Roza Salih for joining us and to Ika Ferrer-Gotić for joining us this evening. Thank you both for your time and your reflections, and for sharing part of your experience with us on Broadcasting Scotland.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And that is the news in Scotland at 7 this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland, and you will find the link to do that on the screen now. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the camera, or in any other way that helps to promote the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be back on Sunday at midday with the full Scottish, so please tune in and join us then. I'd like to say very many thanks to Roza and to Ika for joining us earlier and to helping us to make such a compelling and interesting and informative discussion on matters that are pressing for many people around the world at the moment. And that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. Thank you for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland. Please remember that we are all the Glasgow girls, and please have a very peaceful weekend.